The sun was beginning to set over the vast countryside, casting golden hues across the wheat fields of Daniel Carter's farm. The old farmer, a man in his late 50s, had spent the day tending to his crops and fixing a broken fence along the far side of his land. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening, but as he wiped the sweat from his brow and stretched his aching back, something unusual caught his attention. In the distance, near the edge of the tree line, a lone figure staggered forward. The person's movements were unsteady, and even from far away, Daniel could tell something was wrong. Instinctively, he dropped his tools and walked toward the figure. As he got closer, his experienced eyes scanned the person's torn clothes, dirt-covered skin, and the deep gash on their left arm. It was a young man, barely in his 20s, with messy brown hair and a look of pure exhaustion in his eyes. "Hey there, son," Daniel called out cautiously. "You all right?" The young man looked up at him, his breath ragged, and tried to speak, but all that came out was a weak whisper before his legs gave out beneath him. Daniel rushed forward, catching him just before he hit the ground. His body was ice cold, his breathing shallow. "This ain't good," Daniel muttered, more to himself than to the unconscious man. Without wasting another second, he lifted the young man into his arms and carried him toward the farmhouse. His heart pounded with both concern and curiosity. Who was this kid? What was he doing out here in the middle of nowhere? Inside the farmhouse, Daniel laid the stranger down on an old couch near the fireplace. His wife, Margaret, a kind-hearted woman with a lifetime of wisdom in her warm eyes, rushed over. "Good heavens, Daniel, who is this?" she gasped. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "Found him out by the trees. He's hurt bad." Margaret wasted no time, grabbing a bowl of warm water and some clean cloths. Together they cleaned the young man's wounds, wrapped his arm in a bandage, and covered him with a heavy blanket. After what felt like an eternity, the young man stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment he looked disoriented. But when his gaze met Daniel's, something flashed in his eyes, something between fear and relief. Where am I?" he croaked. "You're safe, son," Daniel assured him. "You're at my farm. What happened to you?" The young man hesitated, glancing at the bandage on his arm before looking back at them. His lips parted as if he were about to say something, but then he clamped his mouth shut. Daniel exchanged a glance with Margaret. Something about this kid wasn't adding up, and deep in his gut, Daniel had a feeling this was only the beginning. Daniel and Margaret exchanged wary glances as the young man sat up, wincing at the pain in his arm. His eyes darted around the room, as if he were trying to figure out whether he was truly safe. "Son," Daniel said gently, pulling up a chair beside the couch. "You're in my home. We patched you up and gave you a place to rest. But you gotta tell us, what happened to you?" The young man hesitated. His fingers clenched the edge of the blanket, and his gaze dropped to the floor. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a low voice, he muttered, I can't say." Daniel's brows furrowed. Can't or won't? The young man swallowed hard. His eyes flickered to the window, as if expecting someone, or something, to come bursting through at any moment. Margaret, ever the gentle soul, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Honey, we ain't gonna hurt you," she said softly. "But if you're in trouble, we need to know. We can help." For a brief second, the young man looked as if he might break. His lips parted again, but just as quickly, he shook his head. "I just need to leave," he whispered. "Please, before it's too late." Margaret and Daniel exchanged another glance. This wasn't just some lost hiker. There was fear in his voice, not just of being found, but of something much bigger than himself. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Listen, son. You were half dead when I found you. If you run off in your condition, you might not make it far. If someone's after you, you need protection." At the mention of someone, the young man stiffened. His jaw clenched, his breathing quickened. But instead of answering, he threw off the blanket and swung his legs over the side of the couch. The sudden movement made him dizzy, and he had to grip the armrest to keep from toppling over. Margaret hurried to his side. "You're in no shape to go anywhere." The young man shook his head. "You don't understand," he said, his voice urgent. "If they find me here, you'll be in danger too." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. Before he could press further, the sound of gravel crunching outside made them all freeze. Headlights swept across the front windows. A car had just pulled into the driveway. The young man's face went pale. His breathing grew rapid, and his eyes widened in terror. "It's them," he whispered. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his shotgun from behind the door and motioned for Margaret to take cover. "Get down," he ordered, "and don't make a sound." The young man clenched his fists. "You shouldn't have helped me," he murmured. Outside, car doors slammed. Footsteps crunched against the gravel. And then a voice called out, "Mr. Carter, we know you're in there. Hand him over, and no one gets hurt." Daniel tightened his grip on the shotgun. His heart pounded. Who were these people? And just what had this young man gotten himself into? Daniel's grip on the shotgun tightened as he exchanged a glance with Margaret. She had retreated into the kitchen, pressing herself against the wall, eyes wide with fear. The young man beside him trembled, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Outside, another voice joined the first. This one was calmer, but no less menacing. "Mr. Carter, we don't want trouble," the man called. "Just give us what we came for, and we'll be on our way." Daniel's heart pounded. He wasn't the type to scare easily, but something about these men sent a chill down his spine. Their voices carried authority, but not the kind he trusted. He turned to the young man, his voice low and firm. "Who are they?" The young man hesitated, his breathing ragged. "They work for a powerful man," he whispered. "A man who doesn't like loose ends." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And you're a loose end?" The young man swallowed hard. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to." A knock on the door, calm, measured, as if the men outside weren't in any rush. "Daniel Carter," the voice called again. "This is your last warning. Hand him over." Margaret gasped, clutching her chest. "How do they know your name?" she whispered. The young man shut his eyes. "Because they know everything. They're not just looking for me. They've already done their homework. That's how they work." Daniel's mind raced. He had lived on this farm for decades, minding his own business, staying out of trouble. And now, in the span of a few hours, his quiet life had turned into something out of a crime novel. He took a breath and called out, "I don't know what you're talking about. You've got the wrong house." Silence. Then, bang. The front door shuddered as someone tried to force it open. Margaret let out a sharp cry and Daniel spun, raising the shotgun. "Get in the back room," he ordered her, but the young man shook his head. "No, no, no. If I don't go out there, they won't stop. They'll tear this place apart." Daniel's eyes blazed. "So what? You want me to hand you over?" "Not a chance, son." Another bang, then voices, more of them. Margaret's hands trembled as she clutched the young man's sleeve. "Please," she whispered. "Please just tell us the truth." The young man hesitated for only a moment. Then, he took a deep breath. "My name is Ethan Reynolds," he confessed. "I used to work for a man named Victor Langley, a billionaire." Daniel's stomach twisted. That name, he had heard it before. On the news. A ruthless businessman with deep political ties. The kind of man you didn't cross. Ethan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was his financial analyst. I uncovered something big. Offshore accounts, illegal deals, bribery. I was going to go to the authorities, but they got to me first. I barely made it out alive." Daniel's blood ran cold. He wasn't just harboring a lost hiker. He was harboring a fugitive, one with dangerous enemies. Another bang. This time, the sound of wood cracking. "They're coming in," Margaret gasped. Ethan turned to Daniel, his eyes desperate. "I never meant to bring this to your doorstep," he said. "But if I go out there, I won't make it out alive." Daniel took a deep breath, His hands were steady on the shotgun, but his mind was racing. He had two choices: hand Ethan over and hope they left peacefully, or stand his ground. His gut told him there was only one option. He looked at Margaret, then at Ethan. Then he turned toward the door. "Get behind me," he ordered. The fight wasn't over yet. Just as tension filled the air, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the farmhouse. Sheriff Mitchell and his deputies had arrived. The two men in suits exchanged glances, realizing their time was up. Without another word, they turned and disappeared into the night, slipping away before the law could reach them. Sheriff Mitchell stepped onto the porch, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. "Daniel, you all right?" Daniel lowered his shotgun, but kept a firm stance. "Had some unexpected visitors." The sheriff looked at Ethan. "You're the guy from the news, aren't you?" Ethan hesitated but nodded. The sheriff sighed, rubbing his jaw. "You picked the right place to hide. Daniel here doesn't take kindly to trespassers." Margaret stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "They were after him, Sheriff. Said he had something important." The sheriff looked at Ethan again, then nodded. "All right, son. You need protection, and I know some folks who can help." Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. "So, I won't be alone in this?" Daniel clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Not as long as you're under my roof." The sheriff gave a small smile. "Then let's get you somewhere safe." As the police secured the area, Ethan looked around at the people who had protected him. What had started as a desperate escape had led him to a family willing to stand by him. And as the sun began to rise, one thing was clear: this was just the beginning of something much bigger.